we're rolling right on through. Hot off the heels of the Archduke Conference, Rosemine has a laundry list of things to do now that spring is almost over. The dyeing competition, dropping off the Gutenbergs at their next destination, and the now 2 brides from Arnsbach coming to Ehrenfest. What's certain is politics in the duchy is about to get heated, though before we go ahead and jump on into that, why don't you go ahead and make sure you're subscribed? That way you can stay up to date on Bookworm content from me. I'm also selling merch that's pretty relevant to this topic. I'd like to give a special shout out to Allos for their amazing fan art. You can check out their page in the description. So with my obligatory plugs out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into Part 4, Volume 5. Our prologue begins from Matthias' perspective. I'm sure you're asking, who the hell's Matthias? He's Guy Gerlach's youngest son, the guy who's been working in the shadows since Part 2 to screw over Rosemine. So yeah, he's firmly in the Veronica faction, but he's not too keen on his father's ideals, as we'll learn. As they're eating dinner, they get an ordinance from Guy Wiltord, saying that his son's marriage to an Arnsbach med noble that was packaged with Lamprecht's wife was approved. Neat. So they want to celebrate and talk about their plans, and they're inviting over Guy Gerlach, given name Grousum to his province, for some joint night training. Matthias doesn't really get it though, because that marriage is blocked ages ago, and with this whole mana shortage, no Alb would throw away a med noble so easily. I mean, at least with an archnoble there's political gain, not really so much with a med noble. But his father brushes it aside, saying that Alb Arnsbach must have felt for the two. Realizing he's not getting a real answer from his crafty father, Matthias drops the topic in a diplomatic way, and then they're off for a visit a few days later, despite this leaving him with a sense of unease since he knows this will impact duchy politics. We get some backstory that Gerlach borders Arnsbach, so supporting that duchy has always been beneficial to their province. But the key takeaway here is Matthias' attitude. His father supports Arnsbach without question, because as we learned last volume, many of the Veronica faction holdouts view themselves as being from there. But Matthias is at least a 3rd generation removed from that connection, plus he grew up without Georgine. Hell, even most of his time in the academy was without Veronica's influence, so he firmly sees himself as just an Ehrenfest noble. With Rosemine and Wilfried's engagement settled, he sees this blind support for Arnsbach as a bad bet, since Bindewald, the province bordering Ehrenfest on the Arnsbach side, has been hit super hard after their Guy was taken prisoner for attacking Rosemine. Basically, their mana shortage issues are really bad over there and he knows it. Plus, he's aware of their succession problems from the information he gathered in the academy. But the issue still remains that he can't exactly leave his family's protection over a gut feeling that his faction's up to no good. That's when he bumps into his friend from the academy, Lorenz, Wiltord's second son. Grousum shoos them away to go train with annoyance since they're falling behind Cornelius and Angelica, because Gerlach's family prides itself on having Archnoble levels of mana. They're basically on the path to ranking up to Archnoble if they can hold that out for 2 more generations. Matthias comments how that's thanks to Rosemine's mana compression method, and Grousum scoffs, calling her a dumb commoner and they just need to figure it out for themselves. So he asks his dad if he's done so, since, you know, he's insulting her. But no. Turns out he has his own mana compression method that's pretty good, I guess. But in order to teach their kids, they need to ask their mysterious lady for permission. With that, Matthias and Lorenz bail to go train. They chat a bit about the mana compression that Gerlach mentioned, and who his lady actually is. Flat out guessing that it's Georgine. Not that they have any proof, but his father called her his lady in the past, and Matthias' vague memories of her creeped him out, how his father and mother were so enamored with her. Lorenz lets it slip that he knows that Lamprecht is marrying Alb Arnsbach's niece, and he's gonna attend the ceremony as well, and that's a big red flag for Matthias. He asks if they should warn Sylvester, because this training, being on the border gate, and this unease he's feeling has him thinking their fathers are planning something nasty. Lorenz says they could try, but probably won't get anywhere since, you know, they're kids, they're from the former Veronica faction, and hell, what would their parents do upon learning that that happened? Yeah, it's a pretty bad idea, but Matthias doesn't want anything bad to happen and suggests going to Rosemine instead. She might actually believe them, and hell, he's pretty much fine getting in her good graces, since she's going to be a pillar of Ehrenfest's future as the first wife of Wilfried, so they just need to contact her. But how? It's not like they're in the academy. Lorenz says he's thinking too much and compares him to his father, but that doesn't make Matthias happy in this context. This segment's pretty important because it tells us the impact Rosemine's had on the children of the former Veronica faction. Plus, we see a bit of their inner workings here too. The fact that we're meeting Lorenz and Matthias here should clue you in that they'll be important in the coming volumes as well, specifically towards the end of this part, as there's subtle foreshadowing about where the Geeb's loyalties lie, but probably more importantly, how it'll impact the future of the duchy. Back to Rosemine's perspective, She's in her room after that heavy discussion with Sylvester and is finally getting a chance to look over that book that Hannelore lent her. The accompanying letter said she enjoyed the book she was lent a ton and wishes to read more romance stories like it. So Rosemind's ready to unleash Elvira's full potential to sate her new bookworm friend's lust, especially after her own attempt at writing failed so badly. The book from Dunkelfelger is so big and heavy that she can barely open the cover on her own, and inside it's written in an archaic dialect similar to the Bible's. It boils down to stories that essentially depict important events in Dunkelfelger's history, structured much like a history book. And if all this information is factual, the duchy's pretty much existed since the beginning of the country. That's fascinating. Though she can't exactly take all this at face value. She's gonna need to cross-reference it with other duchies to ensure its historical veracity. She asks Felina and Hartmut to help her transcribe it, despite knowing they'll be running between the castle and temple this summer and fall, and that means they have Sylvester's approval for the apprentices to enter the temple. But not the lower city quite yet. Also, they can't stay in the temple since the only rooms there are for her adult guard knights. So, they're gonna be commuting. She makes sure that all of her retainers are cool going there in the first place, and her attendants refuse on the first trip though, but less because it's the temple, and more because they have work to do. It would also deprive her temple attendants of their work if her noble ones were there. Brunhilde and Lieseletta will handle the embroidery since it's important. Brunhilde does say to call her for any meetings about dying, however, as she's interested in that. And on that note, she's received word from her father that Groschel is ready for the Gutenbergs, and will be contacting Elvira shortly. That's faster than expected, but otherwise good news. They're related to Haldensel after all, so they got tips on establishing their industry. The next day, Rosemind heads to the temple, though Ferdinand is slightly annoyed about the huge crowd going now. That is until Rosemind mentions most will be working in shifts, and he's getting some extra help out of this too. That's cool. In the temple, she introduces her noble retainers to her temple ones, ensuring they know not to mistreat them, and thus beginning her normal life. She schedules a meeting with Benno, Gustav, and Otto for 3 days out. And then it's time to go help Ferdinand. There, since there's so many people helping now, Ferdinand teaches her some new tasks, and she ranks up from calculator to head of the temple's budget. Good for her. Then it's lunch in the orphanage, where she shows her retainers how that's structured, and of course, the workshop too. It also doubles as her chance to show Felina how Conrad's doing. Once inside, Felina gives Conrad a hug, and Rosemind decides to let those two be alone for a bit, by showing the rest of her retainers the game corner and such. The real issue here, at least on the surface, is Hartmut approaches Wilma since he senses a kindred spirit. He asks her about Rosemind's time as an apprentice shrine maiden and hopefully getting the deep lore on her as a saint, but Rosemind steps between them to defend Wilma, though she really doesn't need it. Wilma laughs it off and says they'd be there all day if she started talking about how great Rosemind is, and suggests they do so later. She has more than one devotee in this world, and Hartmut has a really good eye for picking them out of a crowd. This is a hint of how their relationship will develop, especially once Hartmut realizes how good of an artist Wilma is. When it's time to meet with the lower city merchants, her scholars want to know her plans. This is to figure out how they're going to accommodate the merchants coming in, explain the Gutenberg's next destination, and collect her products from the Gilberta Company. But in the orphanage director's room proper, Hartmut and Cornelius tell her how the furniture there doesn't befit her status. I mean, that's always been true, but now it's too cheap for her and they think she needs some new stuff. She covers by saying it's from before she knew her father's status, but also she doesn't really see the point in getting fancier stuff now. It rarely sees use as it is. Those who do see it are commoners, and that's a waste of money. Hell, commoners couldn't even comprehend the difference between lay noble and arch noble quality, so it's definitely fine. They're not sold though, but it's too late. Her guests have arrived. She hands over the verification paper where Gustav mistakenly assumes it's a magic tool that commoners can use. That's fine. Hell, Juanchel assumed the same. They move on to getting a report. As we knew from last volume's side story, the Entvilken mostly went unnoticed. The wash-in was the one that left the biggest impact. Hell, Lutz says that his family's house had a crack in the wall that the water got through and cleaned part of their house as much as the outside. If Carla knew that was coming, she just would have thrown her windows open so it could clean. Why not? Other than that, no one was hurt, and the soldiers are patrolling to keep it clean. Seems like it's been going well too. From there they say they don't have enough high quality inns to support the influx of merchants, but they plan on having the large store owners house those that are visiting. They also want to hold a celebratory dinner at the Italian restaurant to kick things off, and that's also a good way to showcase their new food. Frida speaks up here and asks Rosemind to come and check it out if she can. You know, she's an investor and all, but Hartmut isn't pleased with her tone. she's speaking too casually and giving a direct demand to a noble. Remember in part 3 when they were just heading to Ilgner and she was scolded by her brother for how she was talking to Rosemine? Yeah, here's the payoff for that. Frida's pretty much the highest status person in her life and also future property of a noble, but I'm not sure she realizes she's the future property of a poor lay noble. So yeah, that's gonna cause a lot of problems if she doesn't learn her place in the near future. Rosemine smooths over this situation by backing up Frida. Since Hartmut thought she was speaking too frankly to Rosemine, she clarifies that she holds these meetings to get frank opinions in the first place. If Hartmut can't understand that, he won't be attending in the future. He swiftly apologizes, and they move on. She makes a vague promise of going to the restaurant if she has the time. I mean, she's pretty busy. With all these summer marriages and dine competition business, yeah, her schedule's packed. While she's at it, she asks Frida to train some new chefs for the Archduke. That way he has some more for the upcoming school year, and then tells Benno about the upcoming visit to Groschel. They then hand over the safety pin from Johann, and it's perfect. Rosemine considers granting Danilo the title of Gutenberg as well, but they say no. Johann doesn't think he's quite ready yet, and then she asks about their trial run on the printed, pre-formatted paper. Mark tried it out, and it went well, so maybe they can use this in the castle. Rosemine purchases a sample and sends it on over. But if wide adoption's gonna happen to this, they'll need to lower the price of paper so smaller shops can use it too. And that's all dependent on supply. Why? Because Benno knows that stores use wooden boards. If they drop the price of paper enough, they're gonna cut into that market. Moving on to Otto, he delivers the finished goods, and Thule puts it on, being especially tense with Hartmut and Felina watching over her. After it gets the seal of approval, Otto asks her about the winter outfit design. Karina made some adjustments too, and she tells him to save it for the castle, since she'll be inviting them soon. Thule made this one originally, so we'll see if it can handle Elvira and Florencia's scrutiny. Gustav asks about the dyeing competition, and she relays why they're holding it in the first place. Yeah, it's to spread out her business and revive some old technology so fashion is more varied. But the issue is timelines, because the end of summer is cutting it pretty close. But she can't budge on that. Too many archnobles are invested, including the Archduchess herself, so good luck. She tells him this is a chance to get other archnobles' business, and to let the Dyeing Guild handle it since he's going to be busy with the incoming merchants. So that ends the meeting, and Hartmut notes that most of the people there were using diptychs, which makes him want one too, but as a gift from her, since he associates it as a symbol of her trust. Well, she's fine rewarding her retainers, but a diptych seems like a low-end gift. Is that fine to give a noble? Probably not. She'll have to ask Ferdinand about what gift to give noble retainers. But in her chambers, Hartmut mentions how he never thought she'd speak to commoners on equal footing, but she replies that her Gutenbergs are her arms and legs, so not communicating with them would restrict her movements with printing. Also, interfering with them is the same as tying her limbs, so that's why she's so protective and doesn't want nobles messing with them. With that, Hartmut understands, and says he'll ensure that her arms and legs aren't crushed by other scholars she'll be dealing with. Good on him. The next day, Rosemine is doing her usual routine. She gives Ella her hairpin, which makes her cry, practices Haarspiel, making Hartmut ask why she's not granting blessings while doing so. But after that, it's time to head over to Ferdinand's office. He got a report from Fran stating her plans to return to the castle to get her summer outfit finished, and discuss the dyeing competition with her mothers. But he's planning to go with her to the Italian restaurant. Why? Because he knows her, and is expecting her to cause problems. Yeah, that's a good call, and shows how much Ferdinand has come to know Rosemine. She guesses that Ferdinand just wants to try the new menu, but he doesn't really say otherwise. Instead, he says not to tell Sylvester, or he'll barge into the meeting, and that's a whole host of other problems. Besides, it turns out Sylvester is actually blasting through his work right now. That's something to celebrate. As for her shabby med-noble furniture in the orphanage director's chambers, since he was informed about that from her retainers, he says not to worry about it. They'll repurpose Bezewan's old furniture in a meeting room in the noble section. That'll be used exclusively for meetings with nobles. And the reason that works is, remember, Bezewan's is from an archnoble family. It'll work. Hell, no one wanted his stuff anyway, and it was gathering dust. With that, she asks what would make a good reward for her retainers. Turns out, as long as they're working enough to make their pay, their service is reward enough. Yeah, being a retainer of the archducal family is a hefty status symbol. I mean, if she insists though, something crest engraved, meaning having the crest of Ehrenfest on it, but that's something super special and not to be given out lightly. Basically ask Ferdinand before she does that. Back in her chambers, she has Gil deliver a letter to Frida to schedule a date for their visit, and to let her know that Ferdinand is coming. Then she heads back to the castle. Riarda plans to involve Florencia, Elvira, and Charlotte in her summer outfits because Rosemine's already sticking her nose into the dyeing industry and can't be left alone. It also means they can use their seamstresses with Karina to get more work done as quickly as possible. This actually means they're looking at Tuli's design and a lot of minor changes are made to it, but the underlying dress gets passing marks. Charlotte is even planning on having a bubble skirt made as well, since Rosemine's gonna make them popular. As Brunhilde and Riarda handle the rest of her outfits, she notices Lieseletta isn't engaged at all. Why is that? Well, for one, she's focusing on Schwartz and Weiss's outfit for now, but she's getting to helm Rosemine's winter clothes so they match the shoe mill's outfits. Creepy. After that, the dyeing competition is decided, but it has to be at the castle since so many nobles are coming. So Rosemine confirms that they're planning on bringing craftsmen to the castle. They all look at her like she's crazy because, no. The plan is to have the Gilberta company handle it and display the cloth. From there, nobles can view it and decide which workshop they like best. And after that, it's back to the temple where she writes a letter to the relevant stores and guilds about what was decided. Hartmut picks up on her revolutionary method of telling commoners what they actually need to know instead of just expecting them to, and makes some copies for her, because multiple letters gotta go out. So with that, she has Felina transcribe the Dunkelfelger book while she responds to Frida's letter about the restaurant. She includes a new recipe and some information about what food they'd like to see, with Ferdinand wanting more consomme. Awesome. After that, it's the day of their visit, and they're going their temple attendance. Though, Eustace is there as well. Why? Well, turns out he didn't contact the order to request a second guard night for Ferdinand, so he's acting as his guard. Rosemine just assumes he's using this opportunity to get into the lower city, but that's actually not taking into account how capable Eustace is. Refer to Royal Academy Stories First Year to see just how capable Eustace is in a fight. On the ride over, Ferdinand notes that the carriage is rather smooth. Why is that? Because Zach's new carriage suspension has been added to this one, impressing Ferdinand that the Gutenbergs dabble in other matters than printing. The second thing they notice is that the smell is gone from the lower city. Yeah, looks like the new policies are having the desired impact. Ferdinand is pleased to see that Ehrenfest won't be looked down upon now. At the meal, Rosemine is introduced to over 20 store owners and takes her seat by the usual suspects. But before they eat though, Rosemine thanks those who come to the restaurant often, which is a mark of pride for those people. But let's just say this is a way of buttering them up. She adds on a favor at the end, asking that they house the incoming merchants and treat them well. That way it'll leave a good impression of their duchy. This is also an information gathering exercise, so she tells them to learn as much as possible and report it to the Merchants Guild so they can make informed decisions moving forward next year. After that, she mentions the new brides, because they'll be getting a lot of business in the lower city once they're here, because they'll need furniture, clothes, and other stuff. The meal itself is much better than their first visit to the restaurant, so much so that Ferdinand is even a little annoyed that it's so much better than the food he paid good money for. Hell, even Rosemine is impressed, since they've changed her recipes quite a bit, and it's definitely improved the flavor. That shows they're adapting her methods rather than just keeping the recipes the same. However, the new recipe Rosemine sent isn't being served today, due to Lise being unable to perfect it. That's a shame. And Rosemine's planning to sell the production method of gelatin to Frida so they can make it a staple. Benno's not pleased to hear that, but she frames it as a reward for her protecting the Italian restaurant while she was asleep. Ferdinand chides her though, since she's rewarded the Othmar and Gilberta company, but has she rewarded the Planting company for their hard work yet? No, she hasn't. Well, she has some stationery she wants made, but that's just more work. Do they really have time for that? Not really. So put that off for now. But now Ferdinand hints that he wants a reward too. He wants the recipes Hugo made while she was asleep, which is fine, but she's gonna sell those in a book, so he'd better keep it a secret. As they eat, Ferdinand is so moved by the food, he hints that he wants the chef for himself, and Rosemine has to step in. If he takes Lise, the restaurant would collapse. The fact his food isn't improving is honestly his own fault, because the chefs need a challenge and he gives zero feedback on what they should improve. Hell, he requests the same dishes to be served over and over again in the exact same way. So honestly, he just needs to give better feedback and encourage his chefs to experiment. As the meal wraps up, Rosemine makes some plans at a later date to get some heads for piping bags. You know, that way they can get some fancy looking frosting. That pretty much wraps everything up. On the way out, she commends Lise's efforts in person, making her exceptionally pleased. Remember Lise joined Gustav because her work in the noble quarter wasn't being appreciated? Having two high-ranking nobles say that to her is her dream come true. I love these little details that crop up, even from way back in part 1. With that, Rosemine sells gelatin and ring binders to Frida and Benno respectively, buys Lise's improved recipes, and that settles business. Once spring coming of age is over, Wilfried sends an ordinance saying Groschel is ready for the Gutenbergs, so she's making the necessary arrangements to go. Since they're going to Groschel and Brunhilde is the Gieb's daughter, she'll be going as Rosemine's attendant, but everyone else is pretty much a given. You know, Felina, Hartmut, Angelica, and Daniel. After summer baptism, the Gutenbergs arrive, Heidi loses her shit over Lessie because he's amazing, and dives right in with zero restraint. Ingo's a bit less thrilled, but since everyone else is packing their stuff and climbing on in, he goes along with it. Just before heading out, Ferdinand reminds Rosemine to prop up Wilfried to Guy Groschel as much as she can, since he's one of the linchpins of the Lies Gang faction. And, has to remind her not to go on a rampage. With that, they head on over to the castle to meet up with everyone else, and fly to the summer mansion as a group. Wilfried and Charlotte are sitting this one out, but lay scholars are taking their place, specifically Henrik, Daniel's brother, is coming along. Groschel itself is a bit past the river to Ehrenfest West, just outside the central district because it used to be part of it. His circumstances have been a bit different, and the former Archduke candidate hadn't married Gabrielle. Brunhilde could have been the Archduke candidate right now, and Rosemine probably wouldn't be there. This is also the home province of Veronica and Bezewans, but because the current Gieb is the grandson of the first Count's second wife, a Lies Gang, and his wife is also a Lies Gang, they're firmly in that camp. They refused Bezewans shit when he died. The summer mansion and adjoined city itself are laid out like a mini Ehrenfest, with a noble quarter for the Gieb summer mansion, and a wall separating it from the lower city. Why? Because it was made to make Gabrielle more comfortable. It's also sitting on a trading crossroads, so really this was set up with her in mind, and Groschel is really poised to benefit from the direction Ehrenfest is heading in. Once they touch down, Brunhilde sets off to ready Rosemine's room to prove her skills to her parents, and Elvira handles the Gieb. That means that Rosemine can get the Gutenbergs all set up. They'll be staying in the side building used during Spring Prayer and the Harvest Festival, though this does mean she'll need to go to Groschel's lower city to deliver the tools for the workshop, earning her some glances from the lay scholars. Once she explains why it's important and that they're tagging along though, they relent. An issue does come up with Brunhilde, that Rosemine wishing to attend the signing of the contracts is a bit of an issue, because she doesn't want her ladies sitting at the same table as commoners. However, that's not okay. Since the scholars really don't know how this work is done yet, she needs to make sure it's done right, and tells Brunhilde to join her and witness the new industry of Groschel firsthand. I mean, she's the heir apparent, so it'll probably be her job to oversee this someday. She might want to check it out. Rosemine drops off the Gutenbergs with Brunhilde and the scholars following behind, though Rosemine baits her, saying that printing will be their next trend, and admits that she was testing Brunhilde here. Basically, now she knows that she can trust her with all things relating to trends. Daniel also has to console his brother concerning her unorthodox methods, but soon he's adapting after a few visits. On the last day, Guy Groschel makes a comment that he sees now that Elvira and Brunhilde were correct, saying Rosemine thinks in a fundamentally different way from other nobles. But she doesn't really care if that's a compliment or insult because she's getting the results she wants. Back in the temple, it's about time for the Starbind, so Hugo and Ella will be off, leaving Nicola in the kitchen. Rosemine offers them some encouragement, telling Hugo to protect Ella from the Taus after the ceremony, and he's pretty confident, though Daniel is letting his jealousy show here, since he still doesn't have a prospective girl. And no, Rosemine doesn't know if he's getting introduced to one at the noble celebration. Yeah, poor Daniel. He has too many negatives outweighing his positives for most noble girls to even take a shot. Sadly, Felina, when she comes of age, is gonna be his best bet, though he's just too dunce to realize her feelings. Though we'll see more of that in a side story later. So she does the ceremony, sees Ella and Hugo off with a smile and a real blessing. Hugo thanks her in front of everyone, and she wishes them all a happy life as they race out the door. But the Starbind in the Noble Quarter is the main event, you'd probably imagine. Well, not yet. They're holding the big wedding later in the season. So for now, this is the usual Starbind for the local nobles. Eckhart and Angelica are engaged now, so they don't really have to be lonely losers, but Daniel has no such luck. The day after, though, Rosemine's invited to Karstedt's estate for a family meeting about Lamprecht's impending marriage. Riarda's delivering this request and remarks how everyone's on edge, due to the worry that this woman will be the second coming of Gabrielle. We get some more backstory since Riarda served Gabrielle as an apprentice, and she had convinced the Aub at the time that she'd be welcomed into Ehrenfest because she is from a greater duchy. But that wasn't the case. Her husband loved his original wife, and their relationship became highly businesslike. That led to Gabrielle having to create her own faction and trends to get attention. Marrying her retainers to med nobles wasn't really the original plan, but all the archnobles in Ehrenfest are basically related to the Lies gangs, so they weren't going to let her have her way. Why is this all important though? Because they expect the former Veronica faction to approach Lamprecht's wife to make her the new figurehead of their faction. This meeting is to discuss the future, and if this bride will join the Florencia faction. After scheduling a visit, she goes to the estate with Cornelius and Angelica as her guard, since she's now engaged to Eckhart, and also because she needs a female guard knight at all times, so Angelica works perfect. The family meeting kicks off after dinner with a barrage of questions aimed at Lamprecht about who this woman actually is, and Lamprecht is immediately on defense. We learn that her name is Aurelia, the daughter of the third wife of Ob Arnsbach's little brother. She was treated poorly in her family due to her mother being from Frembeltag after the Civil War ended, and as we know, Frembeltag plummeted in the rankings. Aurelia's appearance doesn't really help matters any, since she has naturally sharp eyes, giving her a bad case of resting bitch face. However, Lamprecht says she's a really sweet girl once you get to know her. Elvira's taking notes on this, but probably for her romance stories more than anything else. And it essentially comes down to Lamprecht wants Elvira to ensure that Aurelia ends up in the Florencia faction, but Elvira says that's on Aurelia and him. I mean, she can only really invite her to tea parties, but if she makes an effort to assimilate to Ehrenfest culture, she'll probably be welcomed. How Lamprecht handles protecting his wife will prove his worth as a husband. But their plan is to move them into a side building to observe how nobles move in response to this wedding, and also for the factions to settle a bit. That's important. Decorating their room comes up, and Lamprecht doesn't really think it's his place, but they say on the contrary, he has to prepare the room for his wife. And it turns out Lamprecht actually knows Aurelia quite well, despite mostly pursuing her for Veronica's sake at first. As for Rosemine, she's not to meet Aurelia until they're sure she poses no threat. So with that, Rosemine goes to bed, but all this talk about interduchy marriages has Cornelius exhausted, so she asks if the woman he's set on is from another duchy, but he starts to say no only to catch himself. She teases him, and Cornelius remarks how it's like there's two Elviras now. When your mother is writing the most popular romance story in the entire duchy, and it's all people talk about at social events, there's a really good reason you want to keep your love life secret. It's so you don't end up in the next volume. There's a tea party the next day where Rosemine talks to Elvira about their plans for the wedding. They'll be stopping over in Lie's gang for a break, probably to stay the night. That makes Rosemine remember the last time she stayed there, during spring prayer. That didn't go well. This time, however, the Knight's Order will be on watch, so there's little chance of an attack. After the wedding, they'll hold a feast and debut for Aurelia, but that makes Rosemine wonder if Elvira found somebody for Damiel yet. And no, she's been too busy. Sucks to be Damiel. Aside from his reputation, his prospective partner would basically be locking herself into their faction, and that's really not a smart move for lay nobles. She relays that to Damiel as she's prepping for the ceremony, making him think it's probably never gonna happen then. Then she makes some face stone armor with Ferdinand, and learning some defensive spells, as well as getting a letter from Gil that the outside merchants have arrived. They're taking all the items they need, and Grey Priest for setting it all up by Pandabus to avoid the lengthy carriage ride to the border. Rosemine doesn't handle carriage very well, so it won't do her any good. And this also avoids a night in Lie's gang, so even less travel time. Awesome. Brunhilde, Ottilie, Hartmut, Angelica, and Leonor are all accompanying her due to being Lie's gang related. But also, most of the Archducal family, their retainers, and a ton of knights are coming too, since diplomatic tensions are high and two Archducal families are going to be at this wedding. They need security. This is pretty abnormal, even for a marriage of this caliber. Most interduchy noble marriages just see the bride off at the border gate, and the families just pretty much come to greet one another. Now, abnormal marriages require the king's permission, and are held at the Archduke Conference. The Sovereign High Bishop's the one who does the starbind. So yeah, this is even beyond that. Why is this so important again? She assumes it's because the Ob's niece is marrying into a Lie's gang family, but that's beneath his notice. You think he cares that much about Ehrenfest politics? No. This is a show of force to intimidate Ehrenfest, since they're trying to move away from Arnsbach. Ferdinand correctly guesses they're in a panic, as we learned in last volume's epilogue. At Lie's gang they have lunch, but Ferdinand and Rosemine get changed in the side building right after, and bail for the border gate before everyone else. The reason being they need to get the makeshift shrine up for the ceremony. But Rosemine notices while they're traveling that the force that should have been there in this area is now a field. That's weird. What happened? Well, while setting up and resting, Rosemine remarks to Ferdinand, trying to be vague, that she recalls this used to be a forest when they were ambushed here previously, and that little remark makes him grimace. She said this within earshot of Arnsbach Knights. Not a great idea. Using a sound blocking magic tool, he tells her that's giving away too much information. Vindewald is most likely the province on the other side of the border, and this means his replacement is either lacking in mana, or just none was sent as punishment. If their shortage is that severe, what the heck is Barnsbach thinking sending over 2 brides? Ferdinand tells her they'll demand something much more valuable in return. That's for sure. When everyone else arrives, Barnsbach's family isn't far behind. It's here that Rosemine lays eyes on the Aub and their mysterious second Archduke candidate, Letizia, for the first time. Lind speaks to Wilfried saying she heard about his engagement to Rosemine, but says their relationship doesn't really seem to have changed that much. And Wilfried responds saying they're family already, so of course it wouldn't. Charlotte then greets Lind. And this is Rosemine's first look at Aurelia. Or not. She's wearing a thick veil so no one can see her face. And standing next to her is a girl that reminds Rosemine of Thule. This is Aurelia's outgoing younger sister that everyone likes, at least much better than her. She's also Lind's apprentice attendant. This girl pops up later in the story, so it's worth mentioning that this is her first appearance here. Her name's Martina, she's Aurelia's little sister, the one who's more popular, and we'll see her later in this part as well as in part 5. So the Starbind is about to pop off, but before that, Rosemine is finishing some last-minute preparations, while the brides and grooms are all in the same room as her. It's then that Aurelia approaches her and asks if she's Lamprecht's little sister and the High Bishop who will perform this Starbind. Everyone's immediately tense, with her guards stepping between them, causing Aurelia's guards to ready for a fight too. Rosemine tells them all to stand down and says this is a day of celebration. She reassures Aurelia that she's done plenty of ceremonies, and this will definitely be a blessed wedding. That's actually a blunder. Turns out it's forbidden to talk to a bride before her wedding, so Rosemine covers, saying she was just thinking out loud. Aurelia plays along with that, and Rosemine assures her again this will be a blessed wedding, and despite the political tensions between the two duchies, the brides will need to build their lives and communicate with their husbands to support one another. She prays that their lives will be filled with joy, and that's about the extent they can get away with at this point. The ceremony now happens, where Rosemine goes on stage, performs a perfect blessing using a face dome with just the right amount of mana to keep it equal, and that's that. Barnsbach thanks the Saint of Ehrenfest for a magnificent blessing, but Rosemine notices that his eyes aren't on her. Instead, he's looking at Ferdinand. This is pretty much our confirmation that Barnsbach is after Ferdinand at this point, but the true scope isn't really understood for at least a few more volumes. The foreshadowing's thick that something's about to happen, but it's not entirely obvious what it is. Back at the castle, Rosemine's bedridden of course, but when she wakes up, Ferdinand is there to let her know what she missed. A planned ambush that was hinted at in the prologue. Yeah, they didn't realize they were traveling by Highbeast and missed them entirely. So why did they? Because no normal noble would put commoners in a Highbeast. And also, not many people know Rosemine can increase the size of hers at will. Basically, her unpredictability was what saved the day. Cool. The ambush was also spoiled by a letter from the children of the former Veronica faction that Roderick delivered. Well, that's awesome. She wants to absorb them into their faction by asking Sylvester to do so, but Ferdinand says they were trying to contact her, so she should be the one to absorb them herself. But hell, she wants them as retainers, not just in her faction. But Ferdinand says that she's being too hasty yet again, so she has to explain how she led the dorm and brought all the kids together, so it's really not abrupt from her point of view. But from Ferdinand's perspective, and to most other outsiders, it's incredibly abrupt. Well, if she can't take them as retainers, how about her mana compression method? They wanted to learn that. They're gonna have to talk to Sylvester about it though. I mean, her logic is sound, because teaching the kids who will one day be their allies would solve the long-term mana issues in Ehrenfest. But ultimately, there's just too much that needs decided first. Though Ferdinand does want to absorb those kids sooner rather than later, and he's gonna talk to the other leaders to make a decision. I am going to point out this is some heavy foreshadowing for a plot-relevant event later on in this story. Ferdinand's urgency here is our hints for the long-term plans for the former Veronica faction. After she's finally recovered, the Gilberta company wants to meet and talk about the dyeing competition, so she sends an ordinance to Brunhilde. She's initially worried she won't want to come because, you know, it's the temple and all, but Brunhilde's heard about it from her other retainers. She knows it's clean and orderly, so she's good to come. But Hartmut mentions that Rosemine should probably contact Elvira as well just to be safe, and that's a good idea. When it's time for the meeting, the two show up and Brunhilde's a bit hesitant to enter, but after seeing no one else is batting an eye, she goes in as well. They're using the newly furnished parlor with Bezewan's old furniture for this meeting, and after they reupholstered it, it gets a seal of approval from Brunhilde, though they did fail to mention it's from her executed half-uncle she loathed. That's probably a good detail to hide. When Otto arrives, she kicks the meeting off by asking how's the lower city. It's busier than ever with these new merchants, and there's definitely room to improve. But for now, things are running smoothly. Ehrenfest still lacks in some areas.
but where they excel, they're blowing away expectations. They move on to the dyeing competition, and Oto hands over a list of who's participating. And whose name is on that list? Effa, of course, so Rosemine's already resolved on choosing her cloth. Oto then turns the topic to hammering out the details finally, like time and date, so Rosemine zones out and decides on a new title to pick for the dyer. She can't exactly use Gutenberg here because that's printing, but she also doesn't really know much when it comes to dyeing outside Japanese words, and as she recalls, those are a pain to pronounce in this language. And through a ton of tangents and weird reasoning, she mutters the word Renaissance, and that unfortunately sticks, as everyone there latches on to that being the title. Oh no, now Effa's gonna be called Renaissance for sure. Well, too late. The meeting ends, but Elvira clears the room for herself, Rosemine, and Ferdinand to talk. What else is there to discuss? Aurelia's given them some juicy info on Arnsbach's internal affairs. Cool. So they kick this off with Rosemine asking more about her. Well, she hasn't made contact with the former Veronica faction yet because of how close they're watching her, but the other bride they know is in deep already. She was married to a key noble in that faction after all. However, it seems Aurelia wears her veil at all times and refuses to remove it. The issue is, that's an Arnsbach fashion statement right there. So if they go bringing her to tea parties like that, it's gonna invite misunderstandings. Like that she's refusing to adapt to their culture just like Gabrielle did. However, since she looks so pissed off, it'll invite misunderstandings if she removes it anyway. So Aurelia's in a lose-lose situation here. That sucks. Rosemine suggests inviting her to the dyeing competition, and Elvira agrees. They'll just need to keep tabs on her and Rosemine socializing. Here we finally get the full picture of Arnsbach's archducal family issues. The Ob's first wife was from Juanchel and only had daughters, so they were all married off. His second wife had 2 sons, but she was from Workstock. We know they were demoted to save their lives. But when the Civil War broke out, the first and second wife became divided. But he supported his first wife's family and ultimately came out on top in the Civil War as a result. So now they're in a succession crisis, leading the Ob to adopt his grandkids, but only one was actually brought to his duchy. The first wife died and Georgine took her place, but her eldest daughter was already married to an archnoble, so she's not an archduke candidate anymore. And then, as we already know from last volume, Georgine's son died, so that just leaves Detland and Letizia. Now you might be thinking the Ob's brother could probably take over, I mean, he's got heirs to spare, right? But no. Arnsbach has a pretty shitty tradition that dictates siblings are given land when a new Ob takes the seat. Aurelia's father's only an archnoble. So yeah, they're screwed. And Ferdinand doesn't really like that this is the extent of the information they have, since it's clear that Arnsbach is making moves on Ehrenfest. As he's anticipating, they'll want something much bigger than these 2 brides.
I'm sure people are wondering why the Arnsbach archducal family gets so much attention in this story, as well as why I keep elaborating about their situation, but understand that as a neighboring greater duchy, they've been exerting influence on Ehrenfest for decades. Their political situation directly impacts Ehrenfest. Just sending these 2 brides is already having massive political repercussions, and this is just the opening act. There's a reason you don't mess with greater duchies.
Now that the Starbinds are over, it's the end of summer, and the dyeing competition is around the corner. But before that, they're wrapping up the embroidery for the outfits at the castle, while Hartmut and Felina finish transcribing and modernizing the Dunkelfelger book. She wants that done before she goes back to the academy, so she still has a season to go. And while that's going on, Brunhilde, Elvira, and Florencia handle the tea party for the competition. When it's finally time, Rosemine's the first to arrive, followed swiftly by her mothers. And the layout for this is a bit different. Instead of showing each noble the cloth in question one by one, as they normally would, they're displaying each cloth with a numbered plate. Each plate corresponds to a workshop, so the Gilberta Company will inform the noble of their choice and schedule a proper meeting to get business flowing. In other words, it's anonymous. So Rosemine's ticket to Effa's business just flew right out the window. Guess she'll just have to use the power of love or whatever to figure this out. The reason they're handling it this way is explained in a side story at the end of the volume, but this also allows them to speed the process up. That Elvira understands entirely. So Brunhilde takes charge, making sure everything's displayed in an aesthetically pleasing way, and then they break for lunch. When they get back, Elvira reintroduces Rosemine to Aurelia. As expected, she's still wearing her veil, but it has a pretty curious embroidery on it. Yeah, that's actually a magic circle, one that allows her to see right through the veil, even though it's opaque and no one can see her face. Yeah, this isn't good. It seems like she's rejecting Ehrenfest's culture here, and Rosemine asks if she'll remove her veil, since so many people are going to be gathered and this kind of leaves a bad impression, but Aurelia still refuses. After watching her body language, Rosemine gets that she's terrified even with the veil on. so she decides to meet Aurelia halfway. If she insists on wearing a veil, why not use one made of the new cloth they're showcasing today? That way it'll demonstrate she's absolutely embracing Ehrenfest's newest trends. And honestly, that sounds like a good compromise. After Elvira leaves, Rosemine takes this chance to look for her mom's entry, but notices Aurelia is tailing her like a lost puppy. Oh great, guess she's stuck with this thing now. Well, time to make small talk. And it really doesn't take much time before Aurelia tells Rosemine how happy she is after meeting her. She's as kind as Lamprecht has talked her up as. Well, since Rosemine can't really prop Lamprecht up here, as there's really nothing to say, she decides to deepen her own bonds with Aurelia and offers to buy her some cloth. She tells her to pick out whatever she likes, but Aurelia doesn't think cute things suit her at all. That doesn't really make sense. It's gonna be for a veil. Color is all that matters. So Brunhilde steps up and offers a cute design using tie-dye and resist dyeing methods. As Aurelia looks over her options, Rosemine goes back to searching herself, but she still comes up short. At the end, since she can't find Effa's entry, Brunhilde brings her a few to choose from and she just selects one randomly.
All that effort and it was wasted. Well, not really.
When it's time for food, she's sitting next to Aurelia, and she was instructed to extract any information about Arnsbach from her. Well, Rosemine only knows 2 topics total, and her favorite topic comes first. Obviously, books, and that's a non-starter. However, Aurelia took the Knight's course in the academy, and she knows some Knight stories. That'll work. As Aurelia tells Rosemine about some sea fae beast hunt stories, Felina writes it down as fast as possible. But all this sea talk moves Rosemine onto her next favorite topic. Food. Yeah, she really wants some seafood, and pressures Aurelia for any recipes she might have. Turns out she's storing some ingredients in a time-stopping magic tool at home, but since it's so taxing, she was just gonna throw the stuff out. That won't do. Rosemine won't drop it and is using cultural exchange as an excuse, proposing using Arnsbach food as a new avenue to explore Ehrenfest methods. Yeah, it's an awkward conversation with everyone begging her to stop, but she doesn't. Not until she secures a promise from Aurelia. The next day, Rosemine is getting fitted for her new outfit with Karina, and she tells her that the cloth she picked is Effa's after all. Too bad she didn't know, because she didn't actually award the title to a craftsperson since she couldn't decide. Good news is they all have another chance, and have shifted their efforts to the next season. Even more good news, the numbers Karina's measuring have actually gotten bigger, so Rosemine grew a bit over the last year. Awesome. Back at the temple, she reports what happened at the competition to Ferdinand, and that she's also secured herself some Arnsbach ingredients to make fish. However, he shoots her hopes down right quick. He tells her efforts will fail, since dumping strange ingredients on her chefs and telling them to experiment will only turn out poorly. Remember, this is a world where garlic screams and some plants just straight up walk. Who knows what these ingredients are like? However, they could ask Sylvester to let his chefs show hers, as southern nobles from the former Veronica faction offered Arnsbach ingredients at times. But I guess the real issue is, Aurelia could have poisoned them? Rosemine doesn't really think that's possible now that she's spoken to Aurelia, and despite trying to dress up her goals, Ferdinand sees right through her. Eventually, she just admits that she wants to eat fish. So in the end, Ferdinand will take the magic tool from Aurelia and hold on to it while she's at the academy, and they'll have fish when she gets back. After that, it's about time for the Harvest Festival, and everyone's hitting up the same places as they did for Spring Prayer. Though rather than going to Haldenzell, Rosemine's going to Groschel to fetch her Gutenbergs. Accompanying her as a tax official is Hartmut's uncle, a pretty skilled scholar in his own right. She's also delegating work while she's away since her apprentices can't follow for the festival. Knights trained with Bonifatius, scholars should transcribe, and the attendants should finish the embroidery. Ferdinand will be checking the clothes when he gets back. But Brunhilde has a special job here, picking out and ordering hairpins for every girl attending this year's advancement ceremony. These will be on the cheaper side, but ultimately, archnobles can pair them with multiple to make them seem fancier than they are.
Well, this seems like a good idea now, but just wait until someone decides to take it to the extreme.
The Harvest Festival is the Harvest Festival at this point. We know how that goes. The monastery has started farming, as we know, and they had a pretty great harvest because the land there is rich with Rosemine's mana. They're sending a tithe home for her with the great priests and soldiers, so that's cool. She talks to Gunther, tells him that the soldiers are doing a pretty good job keeping the lower city clean, and asks all the soldiers there to share their opinion. She wants to know the state of the lower city, so they share their thoughts on the visiting merchants since they drove prices up, impacting pretty much everyone. And the whole city is packed too. It's pretty much chaos. But she thanks them for their hard work helping people adjust to their new way of life, since, you know, they gotta throw out their garbage now. From there, they continue their Harvest Festival march, though between towns, Rosemine and Hartmut's uncle talk about Hartmut quite a bit. Apparently, before he became a devotee of Rosemine, he was a largely uncaring child. His family's happy that he found purpose, but also a bit concerned at how far he takes it, and Rosemind shares in that concern. Though Rosemind does say he's pretty open-minded, but that statement shocks his uncle. Hartmut is considered stubborn by his family, and since Hartmut is trying so hard for her sake, maybe she should reward her retainers with a matching set of diptychs, as Hartmut was interested in it. Eventually they end up in Groschel, or rather it's time to go there after she finishes everywhere else, and of course was sick in her bed. That means she needs to contact Elvira and everyone else, as she's going there for more than just the Harvest Festival. She's also going to bring Brunhilde and her scholars. The weird thing for Groschel is, since it's a mini Ehrenfest, Rosemind can't really tell where the ceremony is due to take place. She lands by the summer mansion, and it turns out the scholars only ever visit the Gieb's mansion for taxes. The ceremonies are held elsewhere, probably in the common or lower city, but where? Hell, even the Gieb isn't sure where they hold it, hinting how little he cares about the commoners under his protection. He has to ask a lay scholar to show her the way. She tells everyone else to focus on printing while she and her priest go handle the ceremony, but Hartmut insists on coming along too, since this isn't the temple. He can actually witness this one. Don't you love loopholes? Rosemind first goes to check on her Gutenbergs, but finds the side building she left them in completely abandoned for a long time. Immediately she's pissed, but the scholar there tells her they wish to live in the lower city. That way they wouldn't have had to commute each day. With that, she flies on over to the stage in their central plaza and notices that Groschel isn't as lively as the other towns she's visited. Their primary industries there aren't farming, so only people there for their ceremony are gathered. Though she does see her Gutenbergs off to the side waiting. As she goes to start, Hartmut asks Fran if he can help, despite Rosemind telling him not to interfere. But since it's just stamping registration medals, he can do that at least. He learned from Wilma. So she does the usual reading of the Bible and blasts out a blessing for the new children. And that gets a lot of gasps. Gil yells that's his lady giving a real blessing. And a crowd forms as they go through the coming of age and star buying, getting more and more commoners excited over real blessings. After it's done, Hartmut is pleased her saint legend has spread even further, but she doesn't think she really did anything special. He says that's not true at all. Even if she views these blessings as small and the same as a noble greeting, commoners can't bless her back, so this is viewed as entirely meaningless by nobles. The fact she's using her mana on that shows her generosity.
And that's why it's considered a big deal that she's giving out blessings to commoners from a noble perspective.
So she takes the Gutenbergs back, cleaning them off with wash-in since they're covered in grime, and that's pretty much that. Before dinner, she hears from the people who stayed there what it was like getting printing started in Groschel. They're facing a lot of challenges. The smiths aren't up to par, but they're getting close, so few will come to Ehrenfest over winter to train. The carpenters passed Ingo standards, but they're gonna have to cooperate with the smiths. Turns out black ink wasn't a problem, but the colored ink requires experimentation since different materials exist in Groschel. And lastly seems to be paper. Yeah, paper's pretty much a non-starter here due to the quality of water. It's markedly lower quality, but that's not something commoners can fix. So Rosemind says she'll speak to the Gieb about this, and that pretty much wraps up their meeting. Though Lutz and Gil present her with a new book of Groschel's local stories. Hooray! After dinner that night, where Groschel has worked pretty hard to learn Rosemind's new recipes, they hold a small meeting to discuss what Groschel has accomplished in printing. The lay scholars flat out say that everything is going according to plan, so Hartmut pulls out his own report from the Gutenbergs and corrects this situation. Their type needs more work, colored ink needs more research, and the water is impacting their ability to produce paper. But why is he and Rosemind listening to commoners? Especially over a noble. The Gieb says the commoners are incompetent in screwing this up, and he's clearly upset. But Rosemind says it's not on them. They're close to getting this to work, but they just need more time. Groschel can cover the cost for the smiths to stay in Ehrenfest for the winter. That way they can finish their training, but the Gieb doesn't want to waste any more money on commoners. Rosemind frames it as such. The type breaks often, and if they want to purchase it each time, it'll increase their costs exponentially more. As for the water, that's a problem he'll have to fix as Gieb. Now this seems pretty harsh, and Rosemind dresses it up as best as she can, but she needs everyone there to understand this, Elvira too, so she knows how to manage these issues without offending the nobility. Later in her room, Brunhilde clearly has something on her mind as she helps Rosemind get ready for bed. It takes her a moment to work up the courage, but she finally asks why she values the word of commoners over nobles. So Rosemind lays it out for her that the Gutenbergs were in the lower city. They saw these issues firsthand while the scholars didn't even come visit. They're her arms and legs that spread printing, and what Rosemind said at dinner was to make printing a success here in Groschel. Hell, if Brunhilde's outlook is common here, maybe Rosemind's industries won't suit Groschel at all, and she'll need to think of ways to limit the blowback on commoners when nobles don't put in the effort. Brunhilde's in a bit of a panic, and begs her for insight. and after getting permission, she drops the harsh truth. Groschel doesn't care about its commoners like the other provinces do, not the Geeb or scholars, and that attitude won't let them correct or help their industry succeed because it's viewed as separate from themselves. So Rosemine puts it plainly, that the commoners are the ones who make paper, books, clothes, and hairpins. All these things they want to spread as trends are the work of commoners. Failing to understand how this stuff works will lead to it not getting off the ground in the first place. Rosemine gave the Geeb advice to remedy this at dinner, so if he takes these into account, he can salvage printing, but it's entirely up to him. And Rosemine sees this is about protecting her pride as a noble for Brunhilde as well. She leaves her with some strong words, that she sees that she's protecting her dignity as a noble, but she'd like to see her protect the people and land of Groschel, rather than just the nobles there as well.
This is where Brunhilde's character really starts to shine for me. She's moving from being this popular, trendy girl type to somebody who has a reason to do all that. Because of their province's ties to Veronica and Gabrielle, she wants Groschel to stand on its own merits, rather than just being a byproduct of Arnsbach's meddling in Ehrenfest. There's a lot of pride in where she's from, and that informs a lot about her character.
The next day, before Rosemine leaves, the Geeb approaches her and says he'll be sending his smiths to Ehrenfest, so printing doesn't fail in their province. The tension fades right then, and Rosemine smiles. If he's willing to put in the effort, Rosemine will help him succeed. So she lists off all that needs done from him, cleaning the lower cities so nobles don't get disgusted going there. That may even help Groschel develop into a trading town, as hey, they need that with all these merchants coming in. Groschel could become the richest province in Ehrenfest depending on the Geeb's skills. When they finally go, they take a few smiths from Groschel with them, and they're off. Back in the temple, Rosemine is pretty much back to her usual routine. It's past the halfway point of fall, so she's prepping for winter already, and scrambling to finish the Dunkelfelger transcription. Felina mentions how busy she is at the temple, but this is all for books. In fact, at this rate, she should probably start moving on to her next phase. That strikes Hartmut, so he asks what she's planning, and it's a bona fide library. Once she learns the creation magic from the Archduke candidate course, she's making one and packing it with magic tools. That will ensure it's the most perfect library in the world. Her retainers don't really get it, but regardless, her first course of action should be to get permission from Ferdinand.
Well, she's already beaten.
She'll need a plan before telling him, of course, so she starts figuring out what she'll need and makes some notes, like an ever-expanding library that creates rooms that she needs, an army of Schwartz and Weiss-like shoe mills, and even self-returning books. Awesome! Full of motivation, she heads on over to Ferdinand's room, and is shot down pretty much immediately because Felina, Hartmut, and Fran told Ferdinand she was plotting something. Her actual ideas aren't even feasible after he hears it, because she fundamentally doesn't understand magic enough. Creation magic can't grow the library like she wants. Yeah, it would actually destroy and remake it. Adding wings would work, but those buildings are held up by mana, and if it gets too big, the mana requirements become too much and it'll collapse under its own weight. I mean, hell, the mana requirements she's talking about here are just impossible, especially since no one's gonna carry this on after she dies. So basically, she's gonna need to start over from the ground up. But even that's getting ahead of herself, so she needs to get more authors, raise literacy rates, and overwhelm the castle's bookroom first. Ferdinand isn't too thrilled by all this, but at least he's reined her in. He gets her on track for what's actually important here, and that's making sure she's ready for the coming academy term. Specifically, are the shoe mill's clothes ready? Because she hasn't talked to him about that. And hey, they're not. Remember, Ferdinand's supposed to check these since they're going to be inspected by sovereign nobles and such. She sends an ordinance off to Lieseletta for a progress update, and her reply comes back extra cheerful. Turns out it is actually ready, and she wants the circles inspected as soon as possible so she can complete the outfits.
It's worth mentioning that Lieseletta is a lot more emotive in this exchange. She's strictly businesslike most of the time, so they suspect that she's feeling more like this is a hobby than actual work.
So she brings the cloth on over, and they're planning to turn that into an apron and jacket. That way they can change the shoe mill's clothes at any point, without fundamentally having to redo all this hard work. Pretty smart. So she takes it over to Ferdinand to look over, but she has to go into his hidden room to inspect it without retainers. That's scandalous, but unavoidable. Remember, there's invisible ink on that cloth they're trying to hide. The embroidery gets passing marks, but having double the magic circles isn't necessarily a bad thing either, as more powerful magic can't hurt. I mean, that seems kinda half-assed for Ferdinand, but these circles are pretty dangerous to test, so he'd rather not. He hands her a charm with one of the circles inside, so she's also as protected as the shoe mills during this upcoming term. He then asks her where her specific circles that she embroidered are, and she points to the single one she was required to do. That's annoying since she should have gone above and beyond, but it's in the past at that point. not much they can do. 3 days later, Lieseletta gets the clothes done, and they're ready for the term. She's now meeting with Thule to get her hairpin and armbands, but with her retainers now at the temple all the time, she kinda needs a new backstory to explain all this closeness. So basically what they're telling everyone is, now to save the orphan, she ordered Benno to help, and he sent Lutz and Thule over to establish the Rosemine workshop. As thanks, she shared some knowledge with each one: hairpins, printing press, and paper making. As you could have guessed, Wilma's the one who came up with this story, and Hartmut was the first one to hear, of course. So she gets her new hairpin from Thule, Oto confirms the massive order of 30 that he got, and they decide to deliver those to the castle with her winter outfit. But the armbands come first, and Felina helps her put it on. She's so excited to finally be a library committee member again, her ring starts to glow, and Hartmut has to spring into action. He immediately calls the meeting to a close, and it's clear he's learning to monitor her health from Ferdinand and Eustace. Why's that? Because somebody's gonna have to watch her at the academy.
He won't be the only one who has to.
Well, now the preparations are done, she's heading back to the castle for the start of winter socializing and her soon departure for the Royal Academy. The next time she's in the temple will be for the dedication ritual. Back in the castle, Elvira tells her that Aurelia wants to know what to do with the fish. So Rosemine begs Ferdinand, and rather than just letting her look after them, he takes them himself to avoid her trying to stealthily cook them or some shit. With that all sorted, everything proceeds quickly, and it's already time for the social season to kick off. Rosemine's acting as the High Bishop this year, so she does the baptisms and debuts, but while on stage, she notices that all the nobles involved in printing are all standing together, though Aurelia catches her eye too, since she still has a veil. Now it's made with Ehrenfest cloth, and she's sitting with the Florencia faction, so it's pretty clear who she joined. After the ceremonies, they bail, and Rosemine gets dressed for the feast. After lunch, Rosemine, Wilfried, and Charlotte all head back to begin socializing in the hall, and chat about the academy along the way. The kids in the playroom now have the first year study guides to work off of, and the older kids don't really think that's fair, but the second years all built their own study guides from last year. Hell, everyone's in the same boat since they all had a year to study now. But the apprentices are also getting into this competition, so the Better Grades Committee is already doing its job this year, and it hasn't even started yet. In the hall, Guy Brochel is the first to approach, and Rosemine asks him how printing is going. They're gonna buy paper and type this year, while in the future they're exploring colored paper and a possible Entwin count to get Groschel up to speed with Ehrenfest. Rosemine says he should pitch it for not just printing, but also to beautify the city as a trade route and merchant housing. If talks go well, Sylvester might even earn himself an ally in Groschel, which he desperately needs. Both the Gieb and Brunhilde appreciate her support. Next to approach is Gieb Haldensel, and he recounts how much better Haldensel fared this year due to the miracle they experienced. They produced more food, their spring lasted longer, and everything was pretty much awesome, with a few hiccups from Fey Beast and plants. But in the grand scheme of things, that's nothing. He bows and takes Rosemine's hand, placing his forehead to the back of her hand like Sylvester did when he thanked her for saving Charlotte. That causes quite the stir, and he thanks her for all she's done for Haldensel. Next is Guy Bilgner, and they talk about paper making, followed by Elvira and Aurelia. Her new veil came in fine, and she's fitting in quite well, which is thanks to Rosemine. She mentions how she'll make fish as soon as possible, but Aurelia tells her not to worry about it too much. She's still enjoying Ehrenfest's new food quite a bit. Wilfried interrupts since the former Veronica faction is staring, and apologizes for how constrained Aurelia's new life in Ehrenfest is. I mean, she doesn't think so, at least not compared to her life back at home, so it's fine.
Socializing season is pretty much compressed for her because she only has a short time before she goes to the academy, so she's got a hell of a checklist to get through.
Now that it's socializing season though, that means it's time for the playroom where she and Wilfried are sorting out how to handle the education of the younger kids, since Charlotte's finally going to be at the academy with them. Basically, Maritz is going to handle everything, with Wilfried's Harspiel instructor staying behind. She has Maritz focus on history and geography again, that way when these kids become first years, they don't fall behind when they join the academy. Though she is reading her modern translation of the Dunkelfelger book now that it's done, and it's super popular with the boys. Maybe she should ask Hannelore if she can go ahead and sell it in Ehrenfest. During dinner, Sylvester says he'll have his chefs teach Rosemines how to prepare fish, but that'll have to wait until after the academy term is over. Other than that, since their efforts last year, they're now a higher rank, meaning they have a bigger budget for the academy. So how's she planning to use that money to improve the students' grades? She wants to give ink and paper to the lay nobles. Why them? Arch nobles can already pass pretty easily, but lay nobles use wood boards and shave off their notes to save money. That means they don't have notes to pass down, so this will give their lay nobles a chance to do so and improve their weakest link. For trend goals, she wants to bring printed goods, but only one copy so it appears to be a new type of book, basically pushing their stories rather than the printed goods themselves. And on that front, Sylvester approved her previous request for a bookcase in the dorm. Pretty awesome. It's going to be stocked with the study guides they've been making so every student has access now. Bonifatius is up and talks about how far the apprentice knights have come, and they've made some improvements. That'll help with Ditter, but mana is the bigger issue, and those of other factions are pretty jealous. So Rosemine asks Sylvester if he's decided how to reward the kids of the former Veronica faction. Well, they got praise from Sylvester, and he told them Rosemine wishes for them to learn. But he's got some conditions before he approves it. These kids need to swear their name to a member of the archducal family. That's certainly something, and judging by all the gasps, probably something important. Rosemine asks exactly what that entails, and it's a process of sealing your name in a face stone and giving it to another person, showing absolute loyalty. Okay, that's more serious, but the bombshell really comes that Eustace and Eckhart are name sworn to Ferdinand. That's why they were acknowledged as his retainers even after he went into the temple. Name swearing means giving someone your life to do with as they please. So, it's pretty intense.
Name swearing is presented as this rare thing in this world, but as this story goes on, we'll find out how common it is. And hey, just as a bonus, this might sound a little familiar to those of you who read the Royal Academy stories.
It's finally time for her to go back to the academy for her second year, so she's got the shoe mill's clothes and the book for Hannelore, and bids everyone a farewell. Sylvester tells her to strive for a peaceful year, but everyone balks when she says she always keeps things peaceful. Yeah, right. And to ensure she actually does, Ferdinand gave Hartmut a stack of fresh books to dole out to keep Rosemine pacified. Yeah, he gives her a stern warning, and Charlotte says she'll see her tomorrow. On the other side, her retainers welcome her, and Rosemine remarks that she doesn't feel too nostalgic, even after a whole year away. That's because it looks just like the castle, and Judith explains how rough going to the castle had been for her when she was freshly baptized. But her time in the playroom made her friends, and she got used to the castle, making the dorm a fairly easy transition. So the playroom does have some other benefits Rosemine didn't account for. In the common room of the dorm, it's mostly empty, so definitely a far cry from her first year, because as it turns out, the other kids are prepping for their classes. Turns out this year, the knights are practicing protecting the other students while they gather, so Bonifatius' training paid off. Hey, and Judith's aim has improved drastically too, so she's much more confident in her role. Wilfried comes in and Rosemine shows him the bookcase, but he doesn't really care. They have more important things to do, like gather materials for their practical lessons this year, so Rosemine gets changed into her riding gear and knocks that out real quick. Where though? Turns out every duchy has a spot protected by a small barrier that keeps the air inside warm and stops the wind. So basically it's their own little gathering spot. Now it used to be their treasure zone for large-scale treasure-stealing Ditter games, but it's been repurposed since those don't happen anymore. The next day, it's time for the first years to come, and during the welcoming, Rosemine takes the mic to tell everyone about the new bookcase. Literally no one cares though, and Charlotte has to tell her to knock it off. Yeah, she did this with Aurelia and skipped the formalities by talking about small crap before launching into her interests. That was pretty rude. But moving past that, she states that she had Riarda prepare a meeting room so they could thank the kids of the former Veronica faction, and they all head in. Their situation is much better this year, but faction politics have still built some walls, so this is a good way to knock them down. Hartmut calls over Roderick and Matthias as their representatives, but there's over 10 kids there, and Roderick is clenching his fist because he really has something to say. Rosemine thanks them for their efforts. Matthias is the representative who responds, saying it's an honor. He smoothly mentions that Sylvester said she was willing to teach her mana compression method, but she tells him there are some severe conditions, like the whole name swearing, and with that the kids all tense, except Roderick. Matthias says that's fine, because he was told the terms may get less severe as time goes on. But Roderick ain't waiting here. He jumps up and says he'll swear his name to Rosemine right now.
This kid has been waiting.
Rosemine tells him to slow his roll, since swearing your name is pretty serious, and giving control of your life to her is a mistake. I mean, hell, even she recognizes that. Matthias agrees, but Roderick still wants to do it. Yeah, this comes off as really impulsive, but Matthias is a good voice of reason here, telling him he'll be treated as a traitor for the rest of his life since this will cut him off from his parents. Political situations can change drastically overnight. I mean, that happened with Veronica and Georgine, so swearing to Rosemine is pretty risky if you're not fully prepared. I mean, if it was the Archduke, sure, but these three here are still underage, and no one knows what'll happen to them just yet, so they all tell him to think before he makes a big decision. After that tense meeting, Rosemine asks her retainers and family if name swearing is common, especially for mana, and it's not. Brunhilde says she could never do it, and assumes you could probably count the number of name-sworn nobles on one hand. Leonora, on the other hand, is a romantic and thinks it should only be done for love. Cornelia saw Eckhart's emotional roller coaster with Ferdinand and doesn't really want to go through that himself. Hartmut shocks everyone by saying he'd give Rosemine his name in a heartbeat, but is extremely confident in that because he knows she'd never accept it. She doesn't understand the significance and values free will way too much. And he's right. Wilfried and Charlotte, on the other hand, would accept someone's name pretty readily. Getting someone's name means you can trust them, and Wilfried says as much. Now Rosemine still doesn't quite get it.
Since we're talking about this a lot, I'm not going to give the whole game away, but Wilfried's 100% correct here. Because of how name swearing works, there's zero reason not to trust somebody who does it for you. To make it clear, this is not a symbolic gesture.
While studying the next day, Hersher kicks down the door and is annoyed that no one informed her that everyone had arrived. Typically the highest status student does that, but they forgot this year. She goes through her whole spiel about the advancement ceremony, and then demands to see Rosemine to talk to her about Schwartz and Weiss's outfits. Rosemine's not really happy and doesn't hide that fact, which pretty much stuns Hersher, since she assumed that she was a kindred spirit because she's Ferdinand's disciple. But no. Speaking of though, she sends an ordnance off to schedule a time to change the outfits, and Solange tells her she can swing by as soon as classes start, because that's when the library opens. When the outfits are brought into Hersher, she's immediately absorbed in her research, and Rosemine takes that as her cue to get absorbed in books herself. After a long while, Riarda gets her attention, and Hersher asks her about the book she's reading. Yeah, it's one of her printed volumes. So she shows her, and Hersher chuckles because she's realized who the stories are about, because she's heard this gossip over the years. She teases and says she'll let them remain anonymous to keep the thrill alive, but not all of these stories are about people from Ehrenfest. With that, she takes her leave, and it's pretty much time to go to the advancement ceremony. They get the girls ready, hand out hairpins, and head to the hall on the day of. The ceremony itself is pretty much the same as it was last year. The only noticeable difference is Ehrenfest is closer to the stage, because their rank went up. Afterwards, they head to the fellowship gatherings. That means Charlotte's gonna meet the other Archduke candidates. So they go to the small hall, and sitting where Anastasius was last year is a new person. A small kid wearing a black cape, but not black clothes, because he looks like he was freshly baptized. Yeah, this seems sus. They go to their table, and Rosemine's asking for intel from Hartmut already. But he's at a loss too. Typically when a royal graduates, they still have to go to the academy. Well, someone does at least. There always has to be a royal at the academy to mediate any problems, because royalty is the highest authority in this world. However, with Anastasius' marriage and land granted to him by his father, chances are they had to send a younger royal to cover. Hartmut continues by saying that rumor has it, the king's third wife had a son who was recently baptized this fall. Now, most nobles debut during winter socializing, but not royals. They debut during the Archduke Conference, so literally no one knows who this kid is. Good news is, we don't have to speculate for long, as a scholar makes the announcement that this is the third prince, Hildebrand. He was ordered to attend the academy by his father as part of his royal duties. With that, the event kicks off, and we pretty much know how this goes. When it's time, Rosemine and company head up to greet Hildebrand, and he gives them some words of encouragement, and that ends it without much fuss. But they're not done yet. They have to greet Klausenberg, who has an Archduke candidate Rosemine doesn't recognize, despite him being there last year, and then swiftly move on to Dunkelfelger. There, Rosemine thanks Hannelore for the book, offers to lend her another, and wants to make that a bit of a tradition between them. Lestalot's skeptical someone in Ehrenfest managed to read that book, but Rosemine goes on to say she was impressed with Dunkelfelger's rich history. He gets in another jab about Ehrenfest having no history of its own, with a mere 200 years. But Rosemine follows up by saying she looks forward to more books from them. I mean, they have way more history than them, right? Sure, they can spare a few books, and they have to call it there, otherwise it would take all day. Next is Druanchel, where Rosemine is shocked to see Adolfina's hair is glossy. Oh damn, they already reverse engineered the Rinsham sample she gave them last year. Ortwin and Wilfried share a bromint together. That's a bro moment, but Adolfina is much more businesslike, asking about verification paper and why Ehrenfest didn't present a magic tool commoners could use as research. But Rosemine brushes it off, and tries her damnedest to get out of there as fast as possible. When they get to Arnsbach, they ask how Aurelia is doing, since they haven't heard from her at all. They say she's thriving, to be honest. Hell, Rosemine and Charlotte say she's pretty sweet. That stuns Detlinde and Martina, since apparently Aurelia and sweet don't really go together. Detlinde then rectifies her mistake over summer, properly congratulates her and Wilfried on their engagement. She seems genuinely happy for them too, which weirds Rosemine out. It gets even weirder when she says that all of them in Ehrenfest are her cousins, and she hopes they can get along.
That seems like it's out of character, but this makes a lot more sense with context we're not yet privy to. Like volume 8 and 9 of this part make her attitude here make more sense. So put a pin in this, we'll understand it later.
After that, they greet the duchies they're closing in on for some verbal sparring, then they're greeted by those they passed, giving them some backhanded compliments. And then Rudiger comes, where he says he helped during the spring prayer, and that made a huge difference for their duchy, so they have his thanks. So with that, they wrap up the fellowship gathering. The epilogue picks up from Hildebrand's perspective. His head attendant Arthur is ensuring he knows what he's doing, about to enter the Royal Academy under his father's order. Since he's only been baptized for a season, he doesn't have much real-world experience, so his mother's family visiting them in the villa was actually a crowd to him. The massive groups he saw when going to the Royal Palace? Yeah, that was nuts. So this hall's pretty exciting. He steps through the teleportation door and heads to the fellowship gathering. The halls though are pretty empty because everyone's at the advancement ceremony. Arthur asks if he's feeling nervous, but he merely states that he's feeling the weight of all these responsibilities. Flashback to when the king told him this. He'd only recently moved into his own villa after his baptism. There's no precedent for a royal carrying out public duties before their debut. But trying times and all that. The king debated whether he was going to send him or Anastasius, but Anastasius is busy with other matters that are much more important, so he elected to send Hildebrand in his place. And while this might seem pretty huge, he was told not to interact with students and stay in his villa unless he was needed, all because of how much influence he wields. Too bad he doesn't realize just how much power he has. In the small hall, he's put at his table with a scholar hiding underneath to pass off information if he needs it, mostly just in case he forgets. He says he won't, but there's a lot of people he's gonna have to remember. The sight of his scholar hiding under him makes him laugh though, and he's scolded for staring down at him instead of up because it'd be bad if the students found out he was getting notes passed to him. So he's gotta face forward. The first to arrive is Klausenberg and then Dunkelfelger shortly after. The more people walked in, the more wide-eyed stares he was getting. So he's definitely starting to feel the pressure at this point. When the greetings actually do begin, he doesn't have too much trouble with the higher-ranking duchies. For Klausenberg, he mentions that Eglantine participated in his baptism ceremony, and they expect Klausenberg to do their part as family of royalty. Next is Dunkelfelger, and he knows them quite well. This is the family he spoke of in his flashback, as Hannelore and Lestalot were actually at his baptism. Yeah, his mother's from Dunkelfelger. They didn't know he'd be there and they're kinda shocked, but he also hadn't been told yet when he saw them at his baptism. He mentions his mother said to look to his family for help if he needs it, and they pray that doesn't come. Juwanchel is next, and Adolfina is Sigiswald's fiancée, so he says they'll probably meet more often in the coming years. By the 9th duchy, his memory is a bit fuzzy on who these people are, and the connection to royalty starts to be a lot less prevalent at that point. So when Ehrenfest comes up, he mistakes the smaller girl for being his age, and assumes Charlotte is Rosemine because she's taller. He heard from Anastasius just how much of a troublemaker she was, but the greeting goes well without any insults flying like he feared. Hooray. After the fellowship gathering, he heads back to his villa feeling dead tired from all the stress. Arthur has to chastise him for slacking off already. The worst part is though, he can't quite remember the way to his villa, and his attendants aren't helping much, because he has to know the way on his own, otherwise he could be mocked. He finds the doorways to the royal villas, but they're all marked with symbols of the gods. Darkness is for the king's villa, light, water, and wind are for his first through third wives, Hildebrand's mother being the third, fire is Sigiswald, life is Anastasius, and earth is his. But he's struck with the urge to go to his mother's villa for comfort, yet he can't. Since he moved out, he needs to request a meeting to even go visit, so he goes back to his own villa and asks if he did good, and Arthur says he did. But as he's drinking some warm milk with honey, he remembers the small girl he saw at the fellowship gathering and tries to place which duchy she was from. He then remembers Rosemine not being as bad as Anastasius talked her up to be, and further wonders if that little girl is as skilled as her big sister.
Well, the misunderstandings begin. I don't know if you were expecting Rosemine to make it back to the academy after only 2 books away, but her second year is here already. But that's still getting ahead of ourselves. We have 2 side stories to get through yet, so let's go ahead and get into those.
First is staying at the castle from Felina's perspective. It's right before the Starbind at the border gate, and we get a glimpse of her daily life at the castle. Turns out she gets up early, and non-archnoble attendants in the castle don't have their own attendants to help them get dressed like they do in the dorm, so they have to take turns helping each other get dressed and such. I mean, they could pay a servant to help if no one's there, but Felina left home, so she's kinda tight on money at the moment. She eats breakfast as Brunhilde is finishing up. We learn that she and Brunhilde get along pretty well, as she's shown Felina quite a bit about behaving as a noble. When it's time to see everyone off, Rosemine pulls up in her expanded Lessie, and that's Felina and Judith's first time seeing it that big. Damn. So that's how they're moving all those divine instruments and great priests. When the archducal family leaves, Damiel is back for a rest, and here's where my teasing over her liking him moves on into canon territory. She greets Damiel and they share a moment because they're both busy at the temple, but Felina doesn't really mind, in part because Damiel is there with her, but they're expecting Rosamund to be sick when she gets back, and Felina makes Damiel promise to send her an ordinance when she's better so she can return to the temple to work alongside him. When he leaves, Judith pokes fun at her for liking Damiel, but it's all in good fun. Brunhilde and Lieseletta know as well. Judith says she's pretty easy to read, and Damiel's a pretty good guy too. She just needs to keep working on him since he's so damn dense. Though she does give her the tidbit she overheard. Elvira can't find Damiel a partner and he's pretty depressed. So Felina still has a chance here. She's secretly hoping his bad luck streak holds out for like 5 more years. In Rosamund's chambers, the request for meetings from the former Veronica faction has increased lately, but they're still refusing them all. Especially since Rosamund's gone, and passes watching over Felina to Damiel since she has scholar classes that day. Mostly he's guarding her because the Veronica faction is in the castle while the Archduke is gone, so Felina's pretty happy about that. While Riarda was out, Felina transcribed until it was time to do embroidery, and the girls all decided to do that with Damiel watching the door. He did push Judith into it, saying she could impress her future husband by practicing, but she's not about that life. However, that does make Felina want to impress him, but she's gonna need to work on her mana for that first. At third bell, she goes to her scholar lesson, and she and Damiel share another moment talking about the nasty comments they get as lay nobles serving the archducal family. But Damiel tells her it's just jealousy. And it is, but it still took her a while to not let it bother her. In the lesson, she sees Roderick, and he slips her a note without saying much else. Just that she needs to read it when she's in her room later. That's really inopportune. I mean, in front of Damiel? God damn it, Roderick. If you're gonna write a love letter, don't do it in front of the girl you're crushing on's crush. After the lesson from Cantna, he actually makes another appearance. She races back to her room, reads the letter, and it turns out it's not a love letter, but a warning about an ambush. So everyone springs into action with Damiel sending an ordinance to Riarda, Bonifatius sends one back demanding they come now, and after a few tense hours, they get word that the ambush had been thwarted. Though Damiel goes ahead and kills the move by saying it really sucks she didn't get a love letter. That hits hard, and she starts to cry. Judith and Lieseletta just sigh, leaving Damiel pretty flustered, and Felina's not sure if she should just go ahead and confess now or not, and eventually decides to go for broke in her own spiteful way. She says she wishes he doesn't get a girlfriend before she comes of age. That seems cruel, but she doesn't think a mere wish can be. Judith and Lieseletta laugh, and Felina wonders if she should ask Elvira for help. Next is reaching a crossroads from Aurelia's perspective. Here we get some of the backstory on Aurelia's sad life and how marriage is working out for her now. Lucky for her, Lamprecht is a pretty devoted husband who doesn't want to ignore his first wife like his father. If Aurelia is not happy, he's willing to run off to the former Veronica faction for support. But Aurelia is fine where she is, because honestly, she got so much hate back home, she's fine just chilling in her room with her veil on. So I'm sure you're wondering what's her issue with her appearance? Only Lamprecht and Riadina, her attendant, have seen her face in Ehrenfest. Well, a few portraits of Gabrielle have survived in Arnsbach, and Aurelia is the spitting image of Gabrielle. So knowing Ehrenfest politics, she understands the Lies gangs won't like her based on looks alone. She's getting pressure from Elvira to remove her veil, but she really doesn't want to, and Lamprecht supports her in that decision. But he's optimistic too, since Wilfried will lead the former Veronica faction, and Rosamund the Lies gangs. So Ehrenfest is pretty close to unity, though he does believe that life for Aurelia would get much easier if she got into Elvira's faction. Aurelia worries that Rosamund resents her because an Arnsbach noble attacked her, but Lamprecht says she's compassionate as hell, so probably not. We get some actual backstory here. Aurelia wasn't even permitted to select her own course in the academy, was forced into the Knights course because Elstede needed Knights. She wanted to be a scholar, but no. Elsteda is Georgine's eldest daughter, and she was married down to an archnoble, but because she was a knight, she met Lamprecht. Since she was mistreated in her dorm, she spent a lot of her free time training, and there Lamprecht approached her looking to meet Arnsbach women per Veronica's suggestion. The issue is he needed someone who could understand his life as a guard knight, that he probably wouldn't be home that often, but also a girl who's willing to leave Arnsbach. You know, the 6th ranked duchy, and Ehrenfest would have been a lot lower at the time. But hey, guess what? That fits Aurelia to a T. But her father wouldn't let her marry someone from a bottom-ranked duchy, especially an archnoble with so little mana. He agreed to an escort as a parting memory, but that was gonna be all, until the Ob approached years later. And hey, that's working out well, despite that also being an order. In essence, she'd rather be inside than exposed to the malice of the outside world. After the dyeing competition, she regales her attendant and Lamprecht with the craziness that was Rosemine, and how charmed by her she was. Why? Because she found the good in so many things that Aurelia didn't, and it was because of her that she realized her mistake in thinking that Elvira wasn't welcoming her to Ehrenfest. On the carriage ride home, Elvira had a bit of a heart-to-heart, saying that she's seeing now that Aurelia isn't dismissing Ehrenfest culture like Gabrielle did, so she explained how she looked like Gabrielle. That was why she kept her veil on not to upset the Lies gangs. Elvira asks her one last time to see her face again, since she actually met Gabrielle in person. If the resemblance is indeed there, she'll stop asking Aurelia to take off her veil. And after she did, Elvira said she'd permit her into her faction once her new veil was finished and embroidered. When the cloth from Rosemine arrives, she pours her all into embroidering it and enjoying the reclusive lifestyle she's always wanted. Lastly, we had the road to exclusive business from Effa's perspective. I'm gonna gloss through this one because it's more just what Effa was doing to get her cloth delivered. There's not a ton in terms of backstory here. When the competition is announced, she jumps on it, like quick, even though her one friend thinks it's kinda dumb. But she snags the highest quality cloth delivered that day and races home. There Thule comes bursting in, despite not living there anymore, to tell Effa about the competition. Why? Because she was there when they demonstrated the dyeing method, knows the design of the clothes they're making, and creating the hairpin to accompany it, so she can help Effa design the dye for the cloth. Thule's even been practicing her art, so she can handle the drawing. Hell, that's a pretty big advantage. The next day at the workshop, a guy named Jorg wants the cloth she took because he's trying to get his Baroque certification. She won't give it over because she has her own reasons for entering, and it starts a fight, but Effa's friend Dilla breaks it up. While Effa's selecting the colors for the cloth because she doesn't know the new dyeing method yet, Jorg is busting out some strange tools and starting on a practice run. Wait, how does he know the new method? Turns out he doesn't. This is actually the old method Rosemine wanted to revitalize. His dad is still alive and he's old as hell, which is pretty much unheard of for a commoner. But when Gabrielle moved in, she pretty much killed Jorg's dad's chance of getting his Baroque certification due to her killing the tie-dye industry overnight. That sucks. But he sees that Effa has an advantage through Thule and says that's not really fair. But Effa's not backing down and knows her skills will win. It's not going to be her connection to Rosemine that gets her chosen. She says they can fix this by just making it anonymous, and that'll get rid of any bias. And Jorg accepts. So that's how the dyeing competition was changed. When the results come down, Effa's cloth was picked, but she wasn't awarded a title. That sucks, but Jorg gives her support. He got picked by a different noble and got his certification, but Effa's skills were still recognized by a noble, and she's also getting another chance in spring. Basically, her dream's not dead yet, and she vows not to miss this opportunity again.
With that, we finished our side stories and learned quite a bit about the behind-the-scenes stuff of this volume. This was the definition of backstory, and it fleshed out a lot of characters, so it was appreciated. But we're not done yet. Let's get through my final thoughts and wrap this video up.
Name swearing was a pretty big topic introduced at the end of this volume. It initially comes off as some convenient storytelling, as a way to ensure that someone won't betray you because you have their name, essentially playing on the trope of knowing someone's true name gives you power over them. But the more we learn about this ritual, the less hand-wavy it'll be. This is Rosemine's first time hearing about it, but in the coming volumes, and judging by everyone's reaction to their conversation about it, it's pretty widely known, but also an extreme sort of measure. Just her retainers talking after their discussion with the Veronica faction children tells us quite a bit. That it's a sign of absolute loyalty, but gives a person complete control over you. I'm pretty sure there are people wondering what the mechanism is behind that, but that's something we'll find out in Volume 7 of this part. Further, those who have read the Royal Academy stories may recall in Roderick's that he learned that Lady Veronica had a method for confirming loyalty among those in her faction. Matthias describes his parents' loyalty towards Georgine as fanatical and absolute in the prologue to this volume, and most of the former Veronica faction children immediately understood the implications of name swearing as soon as it was brought up. These are the subtle hints that we've seen in this story to this point, about why those of the former Veronica faction are so stubborn about joining hands with the Lies gangs. In the full scope of this, we've not been told just yet. So far, we know most are loyal and support Arnsbach because they view that as their true duchy, but we're getting signs that might not be the full story. That's just the beginning of the foreshadowing this volume as well. The conversation between Ferdinand and Rosemine after the wedding foreshadows a fairly large event at the end of this part, specifically how he mentions wanting to absorb the children into their faction sooner rather than later to preserve their talents. The reason he's listening to Rosemine without shooting her down is because he would rather bring those kids into the Florencia faction than leave them in the Veronica faction. He knows there's issues coming, since the kids want her compression method and are going to come into conflicts with their parents after spending so much time with Rosemine in the academy. They can either bring the parents in through the kids, or take the kids and cut off the parents entirely. At least that's how it's framed. That phrasing is important, because Ferdinand frames this as an urgent matter, and something that they need to work towards over this next year. Why? We'll find out in about 4 more volumes. But it's key to note the difference in Rosemine and Ferdinand's word choice. She assumes the conflicts between the parents and children will intensify, and when the kids inevitably leave, they'll need guardians to look after them. She wants that to be Sylvester, since he's the Archduke. But the fact that we're seeing name-swearing face stones to secure loyalty, and talks about the future of the former Veronica faction children come up at this point in the story, especially after 2 attempts on Rosemine's life. For Ferdinand is now free enough to investigate the second incident, as he'd been unable to since the end of part 3. There's a massive shakeup coming to Ehrenfest fairly soon, especially since Matthias' testimony finally linked Guy Gerlach, the one they suspected the most, to some hostile actions against Rosemine. There was a lot of lore dumps in these past 2 volumes talking about Arnsbach, Gabrielle, and the Lies gangs, and this is a classic example of world building as a primary driver of story. An event that happened roughly 60 years ago is still impacting the politics of Ehrenfest today. We had the betrayed previous Guy Lies gang, Gabrielle's grudge over not being accepted, living through her children and her retainers' children, and the center of this conflict is Groschel, the province that was born from this initial incident, and the home of both Veronica, and the center of the Florencia faction with Elvira's mother. And I'm sure some of you are probably sick of me talking about it at this point, but it's worth looking at from a more modern perspective of those involved one last time. Brunhilde's attitude and motivation to push Ehrenfest as a cultural force and sever ties with Arnsbach, and push Groschel into the future strikes me as a direct refutation of Gabrielle. She's still striving to get out of her and Veronica's shadow. Groschel's culture and its attitude towards commoners demonstrates Gabrielle's impact in the province. How the city was constructed as a mini Ehrenfest with its own nobles' quarter, their dismissive attitude is no different than the nobles in Ehrenfest proper, and how little pride they take in their land reeks of the influences passed down from their parents and grandparents. Yeah, we know Gabrielle hated living in Ehrenfest, but the first Guy Groschel surely harbored some resentment about losing the position of Archduke due to a marriage forced on him by Arnsbach. Looking down on his people and never leaving the noble section of his city is a subtle hint towards what his attitude must have been like after being given land, and it seems to have been passed down to his son, even if he's not related to Gabrielle. But I also thought an interesting detail relegated to Aurelia's side story was how Georgine views this incident. That it's an old grudge in ancient history the Lies gangs won't let go, but she definitely downplays her current meddling in Ehrenfest. How her mother's faction has multiple attempts on Rosemine's life. Now that's politically convenient to leave out, but it's a subtle way she pushed Aurelia towards the former Veronica faction after she moved there.
So that's it for this volume, and I did tell you that spring and summer feel like a bit of a lull in this story, as Rosemine mostly busies herself with printing and trends, but on subsequent read-throughs the tension's getting thick. As this situation with Arnsbach, Gabrielle, and the Lies gangs passed, as well as Rosemine's influence is starting to reach a breaking point. How will this all shape up? Well, it's gonna be a while before we find out, because Rosemine's second year at the Royal Academy is just getting started, and this winter is definitely gonna be a crazy one. But for now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with the link down in the description. If you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to Robin, DBL, and Shriken for their continued support. Thanks for watching.